Hi, did you ever have a hunch and not follow it and live to regret it? Or even better, did you ever follow a hunch and live to regret that? Well, that would be the puzzle of intuition. And we're here today to talk about intuition, joyful intuition in particular, and how to best use the wisdom of your body and other sources than the rational mind to improve life, healing, and happiness. We have with us Patrick Marsalik, who's been a guest many times before. He's a local clinical hypnotherapist and man of many talents, tango master, and has just written a new book that's hot off the presses called A Joyful Intuition. And we're also happy to have Sarah Hanna in with us today. Or Linda can't make it, and Sarah has had one of the early release copies of Patrick's book and has been through it and is going to enjoy the conversation with us today. So welcome.
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here.
So what is joyful intuition?
Well, it's any kind of sensing or knowing that we experience that enlarges us or informs us in some way. And I think my sense, the reason I have joyful in there is, for me, when we can tap into those extended capacities that we have, which I think are part of our wholeness, who we are, that it brings meaningfulness into our lives, and it's a joyful thing.
Well, what's different about following intuition than just living a regular life and doing our ordinary things that we do?
Well, I think in some ways when people live what we call ordinary lives, there is a degree of intuition in it. That people are often going about their lives just fine and may make choices that seem rational, but they also may be in part based on feelings that they have or just senses of things that interest them or that they want to do. But in terms of making the intuition part more conscious, is you can start to rely more or bring more of a sense of an inner awareness that's not entirely logical, it's not always based on reason, that can really bring more meaningfulness and depth into your life.
And so what are some of the techniques for reaching that awareness?
That
would mean having to read the book.
That would mean reading the book. Yeah. And, well, basically, there's a sense of, I'd say the key things are starting to pay attention to what you're experiencing, and that's your whole being, your body, your heart, your mind, sensations, perceptions, feelings, especially things that may not be entirely logical. Just starting to pay attention to them starts to open that door a little bit. And then starting to validate them or treat them as if there may be other kinds of information that may be meaningful. That our culture has kind of taught us that a lot of different ways of knowing really aren't acceptable or they aren't really validated. Mm-hmm. So shifting that starts to open that door a little bit. Starting to treat, maybe you do have a gut feeling or a hunch, like you said at the beginning, and actually listening and going, wow, what is that sense? And paying attention to it. And then it doesn't mean just following all your hunches, but maybe taking that as part of the information that you're gathering about something. So an example I would use is, say you're going to buy a car, and there's a couple cars you're interested in, and they seem about the same, and you sit down in one, and you just feel kind of calm and relaxed, and you sit down in the other one, and you feel agitated. You know, who knows? There may be no rational explanation for those differences, but it may be a part of you sensing something coming in the future or something about the car, who knows? And you could just make a choice then. If all the other information seems to be about the same, why not?
Yeah, really.
One of my questions when I had, you and I were visiting about your book too, was it seems like in learning about my intuition, I felt like I came in being very intuitive, but to follow a hunch, especially when you're a young child, and somebody talks you out of that, and then later it was the experience which ended up not being what you wanted it to be because you didn't follow that hunch or somebody talked you out of it. So my question was, is it possible to read this and learn how to trust those hunches without having to learn the hard way? In other words, going through something that, if I just only paid attention,
Well, and my answer, I think what I said to you before was, in some sense, many of us have had that experience. And if you are paying attention, it actually helps you pay attention the next time. Right. It's like, I'm not going to do that again. Yeah. And I think if before that, if it had been supported, if you had been starting to pay attention more to those kind of feelings, you may have been more likely to pay attention to it. And it would have saved you some kind of suffering experience like that.
Yeah, I my take a little bit is that we kind of learn in this culture sort of to shut down senses, to shut down emotions, to get through the busyness of the day.
Yeah, and in the classes that I teach, I think even when I talk about teaching intuition, a lot of it is unlearning those habits that we have learned. That I think we all have an ability to perceive. When we're talking about intuition, it's just basically a perception that doesn't use the senses, or the tangible physical senses that we normally think about, ways of perceiving. And it comes through our body, often through senses, or may manifest in our awareness or as a feeling. And so starting to pay attention to those things will open the door to more information coming and more information coming. And so it's just like developing a relationship with your body or your heart or your dreams, all those different ways of getting information into your consciousness.
And I think, too, what you're talking about in the book, when you start at the beginning and you get to the end of it, is really developing a balance between that rational, logical mind and the creative essence that really wants to trust this. So
yes, definitely finding a balance. And that's one thing people, critique about learning intuition is like, oh, you're going to throw out logic altogether and just follow this genie that guides you around. And well, someone may do that and live very beautifully. For most of us, it is finding a balance with that. And one example I use is if you're going to ask a psychic or go to information about something, you might think of it as calling the weather forecaster if you're going to go on a trip somewhere. And all you're asking for the weatherman is information. You're not asking, should you go or should you not go? You're just saying, what's the weather going to be like? So I'm sitting down in the car using the example that I said, and I'm getting a sense, oh, there's some agitation if I go this path, or the weather seems agitated here. Then you can weigh it with your logical mind and say, okay, that being said, if that were the case, are there other reasons why I shouldn't go? And maybe everything else is saying yes, and it's not a really big no, so you just pay attention to it, and it may be something that's important to you. Yeah. Maybe the agitation is actually a good thing. It may not be a bad thing.
Yeah, I was thinking it's also a sort of a life process of learning and knowing. You could discover sitting in the car with the agitation, oh, this reminds me of a painful experience, and then remember it and process that experience, and then let go of it.
And that's a nice example. We're talking about gut feelings, that sometimes that's what happens in the gut, is you may be encountering a situation that is really triggering a personal experience or memory. And it may not even be intuitive about something that's going to happen. So it's helpful to have some practice of sitting with it, noticing it. Wow, what does that remind me of? And then sometimes just attending to it, your body will relax again. And then I would say that's probably not as much an intuition, but it's more about your own process. But if you attend to it and then allow a little more and it's still there, then it may be something intuitive that's coming.
I can speak, talking about cars, it reminded me, I've been involved in 2 car accidents, and I had such a strong feeling beforehand that if I would have paid attention to those feelings, and neither one of them would happen. One morning I was taking a shower, and it was wintertime, and I was thinking about all the different places I had to go. And I would have gone this direction, but I had the feeling that, no, I'm going to go down this way. Well, then when I actually got to that intersection, I forgot, and I went that direction, ended up going down a slippery hill, couldn't control the car. There was a car stalled in the intersection, and I just sort of slid right into it. The other one, I had a feeling, I was in another country and driving on the wrong side of the road, but I had a feeling about which way to take to get back to the inn where we were staying. And I stopped at the point on the highway. It was a driving rainstorm. You couldn't see very well. And I was ready to turn, and the person in the passenger seat said, no, wait. And I listened to that. I had started, but I stopped and got nailed from the side. So, wow. It is important. It really can make such a difference.
So your example is nice. So you're in the shower and you have an image, or for some reason you're not thinking logically. It just pops in your head, oh, I'm going to drive that way. And if you're paying attention or practicing that, you're more likely to go, oh, interesting how that thought just kind of popped in. Whereas for most of us, we're kind of on track. We're scheduled in our day. We're already thinking about where we're going, and those things come in and they just get brushed aside. It's like, oh, what's that? I'm spacing off or something. And so that's something that with practice you may start to attend to it.